What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Week 16 DFS MVP podcast. I'm your host, TJ Hernandez, the director of 4for4, director of DFS at 4for4.com, with my host, Mr. John Daigle, my matching host, Mr. John Daigle, here for an always interesting Week 16. Not only is it the week of Christmas, things are a little hectic with everyone traveling, but also got a funky slate with Saturday slate. Main slate, Sunday, 3-game slate. Daigle, how you holding up?
Not planned to match with you for a holiday bit, but also so late in the week of a week where you had to bring the energy that not tired, or I'm too tired to change right now, so it's going to be fine. But yeah, a fun slate on Saturday. Lots of different directions to go here, which we'll talk about, especially because a majority of builds are just doing the same exact thing, which makes it an awesome tournament week and a terrible one for cash games. Or at least if you know what you're doing in cash, you're going to have a lot of 1v1s or basically just splitting rank here because everyone's doing the same exact thing. But excited to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually do think it's a fantastic tournament slate for exactly the reason you said, and we'll definitely talk about a little of the theory on that. Before we get to that, reminder for everybody that the DFS subscription price at 4for4 is down to $24. Reminder that we have DFS that goes through Super Bowl. So, I mean, still a solid almost 2 months of action left if we count the next 3 weeks plus playoffs. Tons of slates. When we get into the playoffs, the slates are really funky with the 2 and the 3-game slates. So lots of different slates left to play. That gets you access to the 4for4 Discord that we're always discussing here. Reminder that if you are already signed up with the main slate being tomorrow, Discord show Saturday morning, 10:45 a.m. Eastern time, not Sunday. We'll be around Sunday, but that's Christmas morning, so can't make too many promises, but the main show tomorrow instead of Sunday. But before we get into this breakdown, this podcast, like we did last week, we'll start with the short slate. So we'll jump ahead to Sunday first and just talk a little bit about that slate. Actually, kind of a similar setup to the slate we had last week, where we have this popular game early, the big assumed high scoring game early, a big dud in the middle for lunch, and then a late night, which could go a couple ways, at least one team with a good outlook there, namely the Buccaneers. So let's talk about this games and I don't know how you're attacking it, what you think unique ways are to attack it. We could just spend a couple of minutes on it because there's a full write-up on 4for4 with ownership projections, with leverage scores. But all of the ownership, or most of the ownership, is going to be in this early Dolphins-Packers game.
And rightfully so. I think it's a lot like last week where this one's not even a 2-team slate. It's a 2-game slate. It's a 3-team slate. And that first matchup and then the Bucs and how you played those 2 ones, especially with so many players questionable for the Broncos. Latavius Murray was DNP all week, and they said it's precautionary, but we'll see. That's enough to where I don't have confidence in Murray. I don't want to play Murray ever anyway. So especially on a 3-game slate where he's going to be chalk, I definitely don't mind fading him there. But we'll see what happens. Nonetheless, like the Vikings-Colts in getting there, because Josh Allen had 300 yards and 4 touchdowns through the air last Saturday and was not in winning lineups because no one came along with him. The key was still to, as we talked about, onslaughting 6-7 players from Vikings Colts. And I think it's very much the same onslaughting Packers Dolphins, either side. Even the Packers, you can make a case, because since week 10, which we thought, and probably still is, a blip on the radar against a Cowboys defense that is injured and less impactful than we initially thought, at least that they were compared to the first half of the year. Since week 10, though, the Packers are still 3rd in EPA per dropback, 3rd in EPA per play, and 6th in EPA per dropback. They're moving the ball quite efficiently. And now they get a warm shootout scenario in comparison to the rest of the league and all these games where totals are sinking. This one, both team totals and the overall game total, just continues increasing. So yeah, I definitely want 6-7 pieces of this one. That can be an onslaught of Aaron Rodgers, since it's you think it's Aaron Jones or AJ Dillon through the air, not to mention taking chances on your Christian Watsons, Randall Cobbs. George Kittle last week went nuts against Dawson Knox went nuts against the Dolphins. Easy spot. The tight ends always go nuts. So here's Robert Tonyan. You can easily play on a short slate. especially because tight end and this slate is ugly. I think it's 3 guys between Tunyon.
Yeah, and two of them are on the worst game of the slate. So
yeah, and honestly, like if you told me to rank them, I think Cade Otton is probably the second best play for tournaments, given that it is also the Cardinals who everyone does well against. And it's so ugly that I don't even care about Cade Otton splitting routes with Cam Brate. It's like, I'll just play the one that I know has the higher ceiling, especially when you're trying to get unique around Brady. So yeah, I think that's an option. Being unique around Brady, whether that be getting off of him with both Rachaad White and Leonard Fournette in the same lineup, whether it be Brady with Russell Gage, who's only 3,700, and Gage, we've now seen. I don't know Julio Jones' practice status just yet. Like, we don't know if he's going to play. I believe he was limited all week, but with Julio out 5 games this year, Russell Gage is a 16.5% target share. So Gage has come to life whenever Julio Jones has been rolled out. And then in that one also, Marquise Brown is questionable. So if Brown is out, like Greg Dortch is 3K, no one will play him, even on a short slate. And I would imagine he takes over the slot role since he's kind of been pigeonholed out of the lineup since the last couple of weeks. It's been Robbie Anderson, DeAndre Hopkins, and Marquise Brown in 3 wide set. So yeah, that's kind of the unique way to play it. I would get my defense exposure from Rams and Broncos. I would not play the Bucs since they're going to be the highest rostered. You can kind of do whatever you want with lineups too, so everyone can afford them. And as we saw last week on a short slate, defenses, you just never play the chalk, like play the randomness game. And that's why the Colts were in winning lineups. So that's kind of where I'm at right now with it.
Yeah, I think like last week, the decision is on slot early or not on slot early. Last week, if from a scoring perspective, it looked like it should be on slot early, but then a bunch of random players scored. Obviously, that doesn't help what we think is going to happen. At least on the Miami side, like we just don't have that. Their touch and target share is so concentrated, especially if Jeff Wilson is still out, that it's basically just 3 guys to pair with Tua. Like I guess you hope Trent Sherfield gets a touchdown if you play him, something like that on such a short slate. He's in play, but actually our guy Sharp Clark in the betting section on 4for4 did a really nice write-up on why he thinks Miami can struggle and why he likes the Packers side of that game. So like you said, if you are onslaughting that game, I think a unique way to play it is to play Aaron Rodgers, throw in a Romeo Doubs, who should be under 20%, which is really low on a slate like this. Throw in an AJ Dillon, who even though him and Aaron Jones are in a virtual perfect timeshare over the last month, Aaron Jones might see 3 times as much ownership at a higher salary. So there's a lot of leverage there. So there's actually a lot of leverage on the Packers side, whether you want to onslaught that or you want to just kind of play a balance throughout the slate and just pick contrarian pieces from there. That second game, I mean, I don't like the running backs are just going to get ownership because it's a short slate and they're getting most of the work, but the game is just disgusting. I think the way you play it is you play like 1, maybe 2 pieces from that game, not including the defenses, and just hope that they absorb, like a Jerry Jeudy if Cortland Sutton is out. Play that at his 25% ownership or whatever, and hope he gets 7 for 70 and maybe finds the end zone. But we're just not contrarian stacking that game. There's no way I'm using the quarterbacks from that game. And then the late game, it's crazy because James Conner is going to be the chalk running back because he's 90% touch share, the only guy on the slate that sees that. With Trace McSorley starting, I don't think I've ever seen anything like this. If you look at 4for4, look at DraftKings, our wide receiver projections, I think there's 28 on a 3-game slate. I think we're projecting 28 wide receivers on the whole slate. You have to go to wide receiver 14 to get to an Arizona pass catcher in our ceiling value scores. So half of the pass catchers have better ceiling value scores than DeAndre Hopkins or Hollywood Brown, assuming Hollywood plays. So it's ugly there. If you're playing one of them to be contrarian, it's a complete dart throw. Go ahead.
I will say though, if you ask me like which one is good chalk, it's crazy to say, but I do kind of think Cam Akers is the one I would suck up. I mean, they just eliminated last week Malcolm Brown and Kyron Williams all together. Like Cam Akers had 15 to 17 touches, and it could be positive game script for either. Like Russell Wilson coming back means absolutely nothing. Like he could still very well be the worst quarterback in this game.
Yeah. Aaron Donald is they shut him down for the rest of the season, so that's worth noting if we're thinking about how the defenses play there. But I don't think it's going to be like you said. I don't think Denver just gets a huge boost. I do like the Russell Gage play. 12 targets last week with Julio out. Can we count on him leading the team in targets? Probably not, but him and Kate Otten are probably the most obvious contrarian plays there. And then if you can figure out who is going to be more popular between Fournette and Rachaad White, that could be the big game changer in terms of how this slate swings. Fournette has out-touched White in 2 of the last 3 games. I think the public probably still just likes White more, but I think they probably end up cannibalizing each other's ownership. I think it ends up in the mid-20s for both of them. I do like the double running back play there, though.
It makes sense.
Any last thoughts on that Sunday slate before we jump on to the decision point for this week?
Nope. Just simply, I still think the play here is, onslaughting the first. And then just like we said last week, definitely running backs along with your quarterback. So like Kirk Cousins and Dalton Cook got there, for example. I had Matt Ryan and Jonathan Taylor in a lot of lineups. Didn't work out, obviously, for a variety of reasons. But if you had told me beforehand that game totals 37 points, math in my head on the spot, 73 points, I would have said, okay, well, yeah, of course I'm double stacking the Colts here. Yeah. So yeah, I'm just onslaughting, and definitely, even if it's Brady and both Bucs running backs, like, yeah, you're playing the running backs with the quarterbacks in this slate.
Yeah. And the gross chalk is like Tutu Atwell is just going to get like ownership because he's the pay down option that's getting a lot of targets. I think it's a pretty easy fade there.
I agree. If it's high ownership, that's what it looks like right now. He did have a couple drops, so it's like that was Tutu Atwell's fault because he's Tutu Atwell. But there's meat on the bone there if he comes in under roster. Sure. The thing is, right now we're not projecting him to. So Russell Gage, Greg Dortch, if Marquise Brown is out, those are kind of my pivots, and that's great because if you take Russell Gage's salary down to the last game, that's late swappable for Greg Dortch.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to the main slate. Rewind to Saturday from Sunday with our really unique 10-game slate and talk about our decision point this week. I think we're probably on the same page with what we think is swinging the slate. Basically, we got 3 games with decent over-unders totals, and the rest of the country being smoked by horrible weather and people pretty scared of playing in that weather. And if you look at passing props across the industry, seems like the industry agrees on that. But what is your decision point for this week on the main slate?
Do you think Derrick Henry and Christian McCaffrey are good chalk? Because the roadmap right now for a majority of tournament lineups is spin down at quarterback, Gardner Minshew in particular, and pay up thus for the 2 highest ceilings on the board, and that is Derrick Henry and Christian McCaffrey. But, and this is not just me saying it for contrarian purposes, I do think it's easy to punch holes in both, especially with now starting Titan center Ben Jones out for the season, just put on IR, and that's the 3rd Titans starting offensive lineman now to go on IR. The Titans also averaging only 15.5 points per game over the last month of the season, whereas the Texans are playing good defense, and I don't know why, but they are fighting for Lovie Smith in every single game here. No offensive touchdowns allowed to the Browns 3 weeks ago, despite losing by 2 scores, because those were all special team and offensive gaffes. And then, of course, a 4-point loss to the Cowboys and just a 6-point loss in overtime to the Chiefs. So they're sticking around, and you could argue that at this time of the year, the Texans are the better team than the Titans, especially with Malik Willis under center too. So, we talk about like leverage, and there's no better leverage here than flipping the build and instead paying up for quarterback and getting off of expensive running backs. Christian McCaffrey, of course, as well. He is healthy. He was removed from the final injury report, but Kyle Shanahan did have an ominous statement in the media saying like injured guys that are like banged up, he's definitely going to limit them and just be cautious of them because they know they're not playing for anything, even though the number 1 seed in the NFC still is up for grabs. But it seems like they're just content pretty much to stick with number 2. So you could pick a few holes here.
Yeah, to answer your question, I do agree with you that that is kind of what swings the slate this week. I wrote down weather / running back ownership from my decision point because the weather is pushing everything to the running backs on the slate. This might be the highest on both FanDuel and DraftKings, the highest cumulative running back ownership I've ever put out. If you add up the flex numbers, it looks like on FanDuel that running back three running back builds could come in like close to 80%. On DraftKings, close to 70%, which is absolutely unheard of. Like a couple weeks ago, I was projecting over 50%. It came in there, and that was really, really high. Usually it's around 30% 3 running back builds on DraftKings. But because of the weather, because there just really aren't that many passing games that are projecting well, which in turn aren't projecting a lot of wide receivers well. And if we look at things like the passing props, everybody's just assuming, which probably rightly so, that a lot of these teams are going to be more run heavy than we expect. And some of Chris Allen's studies on weather at 4-for-4 do suggest that, not necessarily that like passing efficiency is as horrible as we expect, but sometimes play callers just adjust what they'll do because of weather and cold. That's a long way to say that in a vacuum, Christian McCaffrey and Derrick Henry are good chalk. They are out projecting the field by a pretty hefty margin. The problem is there's so many running backs in play, so many people so many running backs that are going to be in positions where they can blow up, where their teams are going to be run heavy, where they are favorites. A lot of the work is going to go to them that they're just working to get such a big field. And on top of that, if you play Christian McCaffrey and Derrick Henry together, as you mentioned, you're just falling into this very obvious build that everybody is using. So I think it's probably pretty bad to play them together. I think playing one of them with a somewhat contrarian running back is going to be enough to be different from the field. If you play only one of them and only play 2 running backs in your lineup, I think that's going to be very contrarian. So I think we just need to be really cognizant. If we play CMC and Derrick Henry together, we're probably falling into, like, obviously your players are going to be a little bit different, but there's going to be a lot of overlap. We'll get to that when we go through these positions. But this cash game build, which bleeds into tournaments, is like this old school obvious cash game build. Back in the day, we made money because it was obvious to us and other people weren't doing it. As you said, this week, all the lineups are going to look extremely similar if you play those 2 guys together.
Which is why I do think flipping the build is the best way to make lineups for tournaments this week.
Yeah, and there's definitely going to be a couple ways to do that, which we'll get into a little bit here. Definitely a lot tomorrow morning on the Discord show. Let's get into everyone's favorite segment of the show where we light $25 on fire on Underdog. The Underdog card builder. We are flipping over a new leaf. We're just tailing the sharps at 4-for-4, Connor and Ryan Noonan, and getting us on the right side of this. So if we could throw up that Underdog card there. I have a couple spots that those 2 guys like. Is there anything that you want to look at before I jump on those?
No, go ahead and go with those 2, and then I'll make a suggestion to you.
Okay. So Kirk Cousins, we'll get into this game. This is the game that a lot of everybody is going to like because it's the only dome game. I don't know if Dallas is going to keep the roof open. I think they do a lot more than you would expect. But Kirk Cousins, his passing prop is 274.5. Connor actually likes the under, and on other books, we see this line down to 266. So if you're taking the under at 274, you're actually getting some value here. I actually think you agree that this game might be a little overrated. Cousins struggles versus the blitz, struggles against man, 2 things that the Giants do a lot. Do you like the under on that 275 passing prop, 274.5?
If you're telling me to lean a direction, I do lean the under. And I say I'm underweight on that game also for tournament exposure, knowing it's going to be the highest roster. Even
Yeah,
if you look
yeah,
at even if you look at optimals right now, like, dude, Daniel Bellinger in DFS is going to be the highest roster tight end this week. And imagine that. Imagine a 5th round rookie ever playing him in tournaments when he's the highest roster. It's
we
insane.
From a leverage perspective, there's definitely a lot to be said about fading this game. We're going to touch on this a lot when we get into the individual players. But I mean, like Kirk Cousins, like this game could still get there. All of the players attached can still get there without Cousins going over 300. Like Justin Jefferson and Dalvin, obviously Dalvin on the ground could get there a lot. Justin Jefferson is just like, I'll touch on him more. Like the game could still score as we expect without Kirk Cousins going for 300 or 400 like he's been doing. So I actually think the under is a good bet too. I agree with Connor on that one.
And
the other one,
it's a little bit of this is going back to DFS, but it's a little bit of an issue with Dalvin that if people don't play Christian McCaffrey and Derrick Henry, like the 3rd highest roster running back in the slate is going to be Dalvin Cook. And, you know, around him is Nick Chubb and Ramondre, who are just amazing plays as well. So that's you know, it's the overall game. It's just carried too much for DFS.
Yeah, I agree. Another one that our prop guys like, and taking this one from Noonan, Devontae's reception prop is set at 5. Got bracketed last week against the Patriots. Saw Renfro and Waller come back, which is probably why his reception prop is down to 5. But now going against a bad Pittsburgh secondary, I think Devontae gets right. His target share is going to stay as high as any wide receiver in the league. His down week last week was 9 targets. So the over on 5 receptions when it's 5.5, 6 other places, I think is a pretty good bet.
I don't love it, but I also think the number is fairly low. Adams, he had a 23.5% target share in that game, and that was his lowest mark since week 8, and only the 5th time this year he's registered less than 30% of the team's targets. And we attribute it to Darren Waller and Hunter Renfrow being back, but maybe it was just a blip on the radar. He did average 35.8% of Las Vegas's targets without Renfrow and Waller the 5 weeks prior. So I'm willing to take a chance on a low number like 5 receptions.
All right. Is there another one that you like that you think we throw out a 3-teamer here?
I was looking at our own projections. Look at Terry McLaurin's receiving yards.
Receiving yard prop is at 57.5, which seems like a pretty sharp line to me.
That seems pretty sharp too. Okay, we can avoid it. What about Jerick McKinnon receiving yards?
Receiving yards, 21.5. That's 1 touchdown for Jerick McKinnon lately.
It is explosive. It's volatile, but I do kind of like the over receiving yards here. I still cannot believe DraftKings didn't price him higher than 5,900 because like the Seahawks are the optimal matchup for receiving backs as well. Like literally allowing league highs in yards per target and completion rate to opposing running backs this year. Not to mention that even if you try to squeeze McKinnon out and say, oh, well, like Mecole Hardman, his absence is why McKinnon is getting these targets underneath all of a sudden. Like it seems like Hardman's actually just going to get downgraded and not play this week. It sounds like he's not ready. So there's no reason for me not to think McKinnon is going to finish 2nd or 3rd on team receiving. Over the last 3 games, it's Juju Smith-Schuster, Kelsey, and McKinnon who have over a 20% target share. The rest of the team, no player over 10%. This has become a 3-man offense. That's all that matters.
Yeah, I'm into it. Let's roll out that 3-teamer. I actually like the Chiefs passing game a lot. I think a lot of there's going to be a lot of lazy cold weather narrative stuff this week because it's easy to say that. The Chiefs are a team that seemingly hasn't been affected by that. Patrick Mahomes has played 5 games at Arrowhead in his career below freezing temperatures, and he's averaged 40 pass attempts, 310 passing yards, 2.5 touchdowns. Basically, Mahomes is going to Mahomes.
That's one of the worst ones. The Chiefs not being the Chiefs because it's cold. That's definitely one of the worst narratives out there. I think there are a couple other bad cold narratives out there.
Yeah, I think people just throw blanket cold narratives on teams. And
which sets up some traps. It's not even recency bias. That's why it's so odd because no one learned their lesson from Dolphins Bills. Like this doesn't matter. Like the win matters, nothing else.
the win matters. And there are a couple games that's some brutal win, but otherwise, I think for the most part, we got some spots to exploit.
Like
Go ahead.
The Jaguars Jets game last night, for example. I mean, Trevor Lawrence moved the ball with ease,
Yeah.
like 250 yards, 50 yards rushing, and a rushing score. Like that's a QB1, and everyone was benching him for weather. It's like, no, weather doesn't matter. And for Christian Kirk and Zay Jones, like they both had drops, and they both had bad wide receiver matchups. And then the weather didn't matter for the Jets. Like Zach Wilson was the weather, if that's the case. So yeah, the weather is so bad. I don't know why we do this.
Yeah. We'll get that underdog in. If you're watching, get that submitted now before those lines move. If you're getting this on audio, we're trying to turn this over as quick as possible. So hopefully when you get these will still be up, but ideally you're watching on YouTube and getting these props in. I will tweet it out as soon as the show is over, so you guys can see that on the Twitter if for some reason you missed it on here. If you haven't signed up for Underdog yet, go to 4for4.com/underdog. Use the promo code 4for4 when you sign up for a new Underdog account. That'll get you a free 4for4 DFS subscription and a 100% deposit match up to $100. Best deal in the industry. Let's move on to the main slate, talk about some of those things we just discussed. Moving on to the position by position picks. I just mentioned Patrick Mahomes, how the weather doesn't affect him. You like the Chiefs and the quarterback in that game this week.
And when we talk about flipping the build, there's no better way to do it than ignoring Gardner Minshew, the lowest possible price starting quarterback we can play this week, for Patrick Mahomes, the highest priced possible starting quarterback we could play this week. And Mahomes now has 320 yards in 8 of his last 9 starts, the outlier being the Bengals, who own the Chiefs. So it's no shock that they ended up stopping him. And then you just look at the overall landscape of this slate. And despite this cold weather, again, that's a bad narrative. The Chiefs have a 29.5-point team total, one that's increased throughout the week, and now sits a full field goal and a half, 3.5 points over the next closest team on this slate. So even Vegas thinks like nothing stops this train for Kansas City. Yeah. And then you look and it's just the Seahawks defense and just team overall that's fallen apart the last 5 games. A lot due to injury, a lot due to their defense just not being able to stop anyone anymore. But 28.5 points per game over the last month, 5.9 yards per play. So I think the Chiefs move the ball at will. I think although you cannot afford them on FanDuel, like this is the difference between people having skin in the game and just saying picks. Like you try building a lineup on FanDuel with Travis Kelce, who is the 3rd highest priced quarterback on this slate. It is rough. And not saying you can't get there, but like you got to then stuff 2 cheap players. And like, we don't really have cheap receivers on this slate either. So it's just really tough. But on DraftKings, at least, if you can get there on FanDuel, congratulations. On cash, don't do it. But on DraftKings and tournaments, I do think Travis Kelce is like the best tournament play possible with Mahomes because you can't fit him. Right. But there are enough confident builds out there on DraftKings, just the way the lineups work out, where I do think you can spend down at running back and then get Kelce. And if that's the case, like that's the way to go. So yeah, Mahomes Kelce combination in tournaments is pretty awesome.
Yeah, I threw out my stat on Mahomes and cold weather in Arrowhead, so I obviously love him. Stacking him with Kelce is very unique, and I actually like just the Chiefs in that game. I don't even think you need to game stack that game, even though a lot of people are going to on the DK side because Tyler Lockett is out. I think just playing Mahomes, Kelce, and then maybe another Chief is probably going to be more unique than trying to bring back Goodwin or DK. I think a lot of people are going to do that. You mentioned Minshew, and as a podcast that talks about the best values on the slate, I'm compelled to at least mention him, maybe for those that haven't been on the site or are using this for last minute. Builds Gardner Minshew 6,100, FanDuel 4,800, DraftKings in that game against Dallas with a total near 48. We have Minshew projected as a top 2 quarterback on both sides. He's a top value on DraftKings. Anytime you get a sub 5K quarterback on DraftKings that is viable, he's almost always going to be that top value. I think most people would agree, or at least Gardner Minshew's in the argument as the best backup quarterback in the league. He's going into a spot where Dallas defense has struggled the last couple of weeks. You can argue that the Eagles have the best supporting cast in the league with Dallas Goedert coming back, weapons all around him. We've seen him succeed in these spots before. This game should be relatively high scoring. The game is played indoors again, although Dallas might have the roof open, but still it's going to be a relatively controlled environment in a week where we don't have a lot of that. He just opens up everything for the cash game builds that we want this week. Again, he's going to be played a lot. He's especially on DraftKings, he's probably going to approach 20% in tournaments. I don't know who he brings along with him in tournaments as far as his pass catchers go, or if they all kind of cannibalize each other's ownership. But from a straight value cash game build perspective, Gardner Minshew is the slam dunk play this week.
And if he gets 40, if he gets 35, 40, he's so high rostered that will kill you. But I'm not scared of the 35, 40 because I think the entire thesis of playing Gardner Minshew in tournaments is asking yourself what you get with the salary he allows you to allocate elsewhere. And again, we already know everyone is projecting to allocate that salary towards Christian McCaffrey and Derrick Henry. So I would just say if you play Gardner Minshew in tournaments, not that I will be doing it because I think it's too high for a quarterback, but if you do it, just look to get unique elsewhere. Maybe, have a couple other suggestions we go along here.
It gives you it gives you the flexibility in a week where you can really leverage that flexibility, really find ways to, whether it's to pay up for multiple wide receivers, whether it's to roll out a balanced build, whether it's to pay up for Travis Kelce. There are lots of ways to get unique this week. So I don't think Minshew's off the board in tournaments, but just be very cognizant that just don't fall into those optimized lineups that you're going to find in lineup generators with him.
And I'm worried too for Minshew in tournaments that it's so chalky that he will naturally steam the stacking partners as well. Like Cheap Dallas Goedert, AJ Brown. I worry that they won't get crazy, but I think we could maybe see 12 to 15% AJ Brown, which would maybe not even get there.
If he brings along someone, I think it's AJ Brown. I think people will assume that Devontae Smith and Goddard are competing with each other because of the splits we've seen with Smith compared to with or without Goddard, and just AJ's been balling. So I think AJ's the one that gets steamed.
I like Goddard.
Nice. I like that. You also like a running back in this game.
I do, and that's because the leverage off of Gardner Minshew, in my opinion, is Miles Sanders. When I doing just initially research and usage from week 15 off the top of my head, I told myself, when I was going into DraftKings for the first time to look at salaries at the beginning of the week, I said, it's a really good week to pay up for Eagles defense. 3,700, 3,800, especially with Jalen Hurts out. That's the play here. No big deal. I can work some salary and pay up for a unique defense. Then I look, and they made them 2,200. And that's crazy because the Eagles are the better team, and Jalen Hurts is not worth 3 points in this game at this time of the year. So not only were the Eagles 1.5 dogs initially with Hurts, they got bet down by dumb money to 6-point dogs, and then got steamed back up. They're sitting at 4.5 now, which is a little more correct. But the fact is that Miles Sanders, after a week where in small field, that dude closed as 32% rostered in the SPY and double SPY in the 222 on FanDuel that last week. And now, suddenly no one wants to play him whenever everyone's playing the quarterback. That makes zero sense because the Eagles very easily could win this game. Dak, 9 interceptions in the last 6 weeks. I think the Eagles-Sanders paydown correlation off of Minshew in the passing game, it's the premier time to do it. And it's just the perfect week for it.
Yeah, over the last 6 weeks, the Cowboys are 25th in explosive rush rate allowed. Now they're going to be without Leighton Vander Esch, who hurt his neck last week. Miles Sanders is going to be a play that, we talk about leverage spots a lot. I think one thing that gets overlooked is where can you get the most bang for your bucks in terms of leverage. So not just a price pivot, not just a flip the build, not just leverage off your teammate, but how do you get kind of all of these things rolled into one? And Miles Sanders is that, because you're getting leverage off the Eagles passing game. You're flipping the build by not paying up for an expensive running back on a game where everybody's expecting, or they are the underdog on the team. So I like that play. I wrote up Sanders as, I actually called him one of the best contrarian running backs on the slate, if not the best contrarian running back on the slate. Do you have any interest in pairing Miles Sanders with Gardner Minshew? I mean, they have to go, the offense has to go ballistic for that, right?
I don't think it's the worst idea. My only concern, because I see that question in the chat, would be that last week, the entire reason why Sanders busted was because he didn't get his first touch until 6:24 remaining in the second quarter, because Kenneth Gainwell was playing over him and passing game script. Like, the idea was that, even Nick Sirianni talked about it after the game, the Bears run single high safety, man coverage, and they wanted to give Devonta and A.J. Brown every chance possible at 50-50 balls. That was their plan anytime they saw one safety at the top. And also, NFL Next Gen Stats charted A.J. Brown, 143 of his career high receiving yards that day came against single high safety. That was literally intention. Whereas if it's a running game script, then I would imagine it's all Sanders. So I don't think you can correlate them, but it wouldn't be shocking if I looked up and like the winning lineup had that, because it's so unique.
Yeah. That actually is, yeah, that's what I'm hoping for too. We talked about the expensive running backs, the two big ones, Derrick Henry and Christian McCaffrey. I wanted to highlight Christian McCaffrey here at 9,400 FanDuel, 8,800 on DraftKings. Everybody's talking about, you tweeted about, everybody's talking about the Derrick Henry splits versus Houston. So who needs to talk about that? Christian McCaffrey, as you highlighted in your article this morning, 32 touches without Debo last week. I think that's very important to note. 6+ targets in 2 of his 3 games with Brock Purdy, 100+ rushing yards in consecutive games. I mean, you mentioned the talk about possibly being limited, but I mean, the ceiling here, I think, is unmatched. This is like 10K Christian McCaffrey usage that we're seeing. We have projected as a top 2 value on both sites. And as I talked about, this is like an old school. If you played DFS back in the Draft Street days, it was jam in Le'Veon Bell, jam in David Johnson in cash games, and just figure out everything else and print money. And it's kind of the same setup. The first time we've had this in years, where you just jam in CMC and Derrick Henry in cash games and figure out everything else. I think it's really that simple in cash this week.
I do also think this game between the Commanders and 49ers, although the total continues sinking, I do think it's like one of the sneakier game stack possibilities, whether or not you play the quarterbacks at all. There are quite a few interesting players in this game. And remember, it's one of only 2 games in late swapping position with the Eagles Cowboys.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, especially because CMC is going to be popular. We both wrote up 49ers players that we like this week. So that is definitely tournament leverage.
I told you to look up Terry McLaurin's receiving yards, because McLaurin 26.5% target share in the 3 games that Taylor Heineke has gone over 30 pass attempts this year, which he hasn't done in 6 of his last 7 games. The outlier was that 70-minute tie against the Giants, but we at least have 3 instances of it. And Terry McLaurin has finished with 73 yards and or a touchdown in all of those games. So I do think it's a sneaky spot for McLaurin and a 49er run back.
All right. Moving on to wide receivers, a game that has some cold, but in terms of the cold weather games, probably one of the most mild games. You like a player on the home side.
I think the Panthers-Lions game may be another fraudulent cold game. And more importantly, we know exactly how the Panthers are going to attack them, because Detroit not allowed a single player over 75 rushing yards since their Week 7 bye. They've been one of the best run defenses over the second half of the league, but opponents also know that. And that's why in this span since Week 8, the Lions are seeing 37 pass attempts per game from opposing quarterbacks. And we know where the ball is going to go. More importantly now, these last 3 games with Sam Darnold, DJ Moore leads the team in routes run from the slot, an increased rate, nearly 30% of his routes from the slot. And that's where the Lions permit a league high 10.5 yards per target. So every year, every week. Last week, we tried to do it with Elijah Moore, but we knew we lost that whenever Zach Wilson was under center. We tried to attack the lines from the slot, and now it's DJ Moore. This Panthers defense is also bottom 5 in completion rate on throws 10+ yards downfield. So if we can pretty much guarantee the volume for DJ Moore, we can also guarantee that it's a good spot. So for better or worse, I think he's at least going to be pelted with targets from Sam Darnold, and let's coin toss it and see what happens, because it's an amazing matchup.
Yeah, I like this game for mini stacks. I also I think just the primary wide receivers in this game are really good plays. I think in all of these cold weather games, these primary receivers, these alpha players are really good place to target, because we get a lot of, one thing I tweeted yesterday is like, it seems obvious, but fantasy projections, Vegas totals, they're accounting for weather. So don't double count when you're trying to figure out who you should be playing. Like there's still going to be some points scored. The guys that get huge touch or target shares are going to continue to do that in the cold weather. So yeah, the teams might be scoring 17 points, 20 points, but they're going to feed their guys still. There's still going to be fantasy points to be scored. So the DJ Moores of the world are the guys that could still hit in these spots. Like, you know, just because it's cold doesn't mean DJ isn't going to go for 101. It's very much his range of outcomes.
Yeah, I like it. And you mentioned the primary receivers, like no one's playing Amon-Ra St. Brown since they theoretically can't get up to him since they're paying up for running backs. Like I said, flip the bill.
Yeah, that's the move. And that you won't be flipping the build per se, because this guy's going to be owned, but Justin Jefferson, 9,300 on both sides in that.
He'll be less owned in comparison to normal weeks, even though he's carrying the highest projected ceiling.
This is exactly why I suggested him, because I think in a lot of weeks, like in this spot, Justin Jefferson might be 35%. He's 25% this week. The total's actually moving up in this game. I knew we threw some shade at Kirk Cousins a little bit in the underdog portion, but Justin Jefferson is seeing so much of the target share that even if Cousins does only throw for 250, Justin Jefferson can very much get there. Leads the league 13.3 targets per game over the last month. One of 5 players over 30% target share over the last month. New York is one of 2 teams that ranks in the bottom half of schedule adjusted points allowed to every single skill position. The Vikings are throwing at the 7th highest rate over expectation over the last month. And if you play one of CMC or Derrick Henry, you can fit Justin Jefferson pretty easy. If you play neither of them, you can definitely get him in there. And then, I mean, I just think that he is, again, when we don't have like him, Amon-Ra, I guess Jamar against the Patriots, although I don't love that. Like we don't have these like projecting blow up spots. So I do think Jefferson can lap the field at 22%. I just mentioned Jamar. Well, let's talk about a wide receiver on the other side, actually.
Jakobi Meyers returned last week from the concussion protocol and tied for the team leading target 6, the 3rd most routes among all New England's players. And that was actually his lowest route rate in a game all year, which suggests that he was actually limited in his first game back, even though the opportunity and the volume was still there as if he was the team's number 1 receiver. And so I expect his usage to grow back to leading the team in routes run instead of Tyquan Thornton this week against the Bengals. And that's important since Cincinnati is the team allowing the 3rd most yards per target from the slot, where Jakobi Meyers primary plays. So if you have any Bengals skinny stacks, and I think this game is pretty live, because again, it's a weather game where it's only cold, it's not windy, and it's volatile. Just like Joe Burrow every single week, it's always volatile because Zach Taylor could easily screw the situation up. But New England's defense has been so bad that if Zach Taylor does not screw this up, this one could pop off. So I do think Jakobi Meyers, even in paying down, is pretty sneaky since no one's really getting to him. And the argument, honestly, the con against him is that, yes, Mac Jones has been abysmal. And I don't blame it all on Mac Jones. It's a lot of Matt Patricia and Joe Judge, but Jakobi Meyers is just an amazing spot if he gets the volume at full health.
There were some reports earlier in the week that Belichick was asked about Jones starting the rest of the season. He was non-committal. So is this like a squeaky wheel? Mac Jones comes out and throws for 303 just because of that?
Myers has a 30% target share from Bailey Zappi whenever they played together. So no, like if Bailey Zappi's under center, I'll play Jakobi Meyers
Even
easily.
better.
Yeah.
For my second wide receiver, I didn't write down a wide receiver. I wrote down New York Giants wide receivers, just because I wanted to talk to you about this spot, because this game is going to be artificially inflated in terms of ownership because it's the only indoor game. It's the high total game. Again, I mean, we've talked about it already ad nauseum, the weather and everybody avoiding all the other passing games on this slate. I projected all of these pass catchers somewhat moderately. You mentioned Bellinger, who, especially on DraftKings, might be the most rostered wide receiver on the slate.
I think you will.
And then we have Hodges, Darius Slayton, and Richie James. I projected their ownership somewhat moderately. I've seen people talk about like Richie James is going to be the mega chalk, which he's not projecting well, like in terms of fantasy points. And there's no player on the Giants that dominates targets over the last month. They have 5 players averaging at least 4 targets per game. No players averaging more than 6 targets per game. No player in the last month has seen 10 targets in a game. So like, where is this Richie James chalk the obvious play coming from? Is that like, I can see if he has a sharp play, sure, but like, is the public just going to look at this and just click Richie James? Like, what is this?
I think it's only because he's 200 cheaper. Well, no. Because he is 3,900 on DraftKings, where you get the points for his receptions, and Darius Slayton is 5,200. But I will try and sell you on the fact that I think Isaiah Hodgins is better play than Richie James at 200 more anyhow. Like, no matter the projections.
100%. If the reason and that's exactly why I brought this up, because if we have all these guys where, sure, like, you know, some of them, they're not getting the same types of targets, different value targets. But if all of these guys are going to see 5 to 7 targets, and one of them is going to be 30%, and one of them is going to be 9%, like, what are we even doing here? This is crazy to me.
And over the last month of the season, without Wan'Dale Robinson, Darius Slayton leads the team with a 20.1% target share.
Yeah.
Isaiah Hodgins is right behind him with a 16.8% target share. And that's important to note because those 2 players are also relative to everyone else in the Giants, Daniel Bellinger and Richie James. Those other 2 who are getting more volume and money opportunity inside the red zone. Like Hodgins, since Wan'Dale Robinson got injured, actually has 100% of the team's end zone targets as well. Then I think it's a good enough reason that if you play Daniel Jones, you know to play Darius Slayton, who has accounted for 59% of Daniel Jones' targets 20 yards downfield since he entered the rotation in week 4, and Hodgins over James and Bellinger. And Darius Slayton, you may say only a big play specialist, and I agree, but you can also say we've seen so many times this year where Brian Dable calls the game based on the weakness of the defense. He changes it up every single week. And so you can see them coming out and specifically attacking downfield much more often than usual. And if that's the case, it all goes to Slayton. So I would go Slayton and Hodgins easily with Daniel Jones over James and Bellinger.
All right. I'm glad you said that, because I just like, I obviously, as far as ownership projections go, like, always do my due diligence and look as much around the industry as I can to get everything as accurate as possible. And like, that was just completely throwing me off. I still think at 3,900, Richie James makes sense in cash game builds, because we do want to get up to CMC and Derrick Henry. But on DraftKings at 4 for 4 in that same game, KJ Osborne actually has basically the same ceiling value score as Richie James at like 5 times less ownership. So that's worth noting. On FanDuel, Darius Slayton is $1,100 more than Richie James, and 4 is still giving him a better ceiling value score. So tonight I'm going to go back through and see. I mean, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'll give Richie James the high ownership projection if I need to, because we want the ownership projection to be accurate, but I definitely do not agree with it at all.
Right.
Let's talk about Daniel Bellinger.
Sure. The opportunity is why he is the cash game quarterback on DraftKings. I actually think he's kind of live on FanDuel too at 4,700, just because the disparity, the margin between him and Hawkinson is 6K over there, right? Yeah. So 1,300 on FanDuel is actually quite a bit. Usually the difference is much more thinner than that to play a Bellinger on FanDuel. But season high, 98% of snaps last week. And more importantly, season high in route participation, 88% of routes on Daniel Jones dropbacks. And then you look up and it's indoors among a game not indoors. And the Vikings are allowing the 11th most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. So a good spot as well. Again, you're not playing 25% Daniel Bellinger in tournaments, but he's a cash game option. And I think even flipping the build at tight end and going Kelsey, even if you have Geno, like I think Geno with the Goodwin and DK Metcalf, and then Kelsey is a better way to go here than Daniel Bellinger in tournaments.
And if we agree that in cash games that CMC Derrick Henry is the build, then you're not getting Travis Kelsey. If we're not getting Travis Kelsey, it's a Travis Kelsey or punt week, especially in cash games. Like there's some middling guys that make sense tournaments with ceilings, but in cash games, Travis Kelsey. Go ahead.
Feel free to punt your tight end in tournaments as well if you're not getting up to Kelsey with your quarterback. Like if you play Joe Burrow, go Mitchell Wilcox. If you play Gardner Minshew, go Dallas Goedert. If you play Geno, again, Kelsey makes sense in that build, but you can also go Fant and Chiefs running back and Juju instead. But yeah, I'm just correlating with my tight end this week in particular with my quarterback.
Yeah, and my point was going to be that if you're going to punt, like don't alligator arm the punt. If you look at the punt options, the sub 4K options, like we got Noah Fant projecting okay, but he's in a tight end share with Will Dissly, which I'm not interested. We got Jordan Akins projecting okay, but it's the Houston passing game and Brandon Cooks might play, so we don't love that. So Bellinger at 3,300, we just talked about punting those wide receiver, that pass catching core. If we're going to punt a position, I'd much rather be punting tight end because we're already punting the position. So let's just leverage the whole damn offense and throw Bellinger in there instead of the other guys.
That's the way to do it.
The middle tier guys that I do like are in the same game, Dallas Goedert and Dalton Schultz. I just wrote Dalton Schultz here down because I think compared to Philadelphia, I have a lot less trust in the secondary wide receivers on the Cowboys than I do on the Eagles. I mean, after CeeDee Lamb, Noah Brown, I mean, sure, he caught touchdowns and last week he had a good game, but not running as many routes as Gallup. His targets fluctuate just wildly. And then you throw T.Y. Hilton in the mix, and I just think it makes the wide receiver room really gross beyond CeeDee Lamb, whereas Dalton Schultz, 6.2 targets per game since the bye. He is a top 2 tight end in the 4-for-4 receiver breakout model, second in expected fantasy points per game among all tight ends over the last 3 weeks. And I do think if there are tight ends that get steamed, I think it's Bellinger or TJ Hawkinson. Schultz, he'll get moderate ownership, but he's not the one that's going to get up to like 15, 16, 17%. So I mean, it's kind of funky to fit him in cash games. He might work, but definitely in tournaments. I think that should be a relatively unique piece of the game. And I think if Kelsey doesn't go nuclear, I think Schultz is the guy that has a good chance to have a pretty good leg up on the field. I think at least on the main slate, tight end 1 is very much in his range of outcomes.
Dak is really cheap too. Not that he may enter my player pool, but he's really cheap for offense that just put up 34 points last week.
Yeah, I mean, you can go Dak, CD, Dalton Schultz pretty comfortably in a week where there aren't a lot of high scoring games, and their salary is moderate, but it's going to get you off of Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry double builds, and none of their ownership is going to be high, so that's going to be a unique double stack combo.
Mm-hmm.
Your defense surprised me, so tell me about it.
Yeah, I've already talked about Eagles is one of my favorite cheap defenses. My other favorite cheap defense is the Texans. That's, in my opinion, one of 2 ways to get leverage off of Derrick Henry this week. Again, Titans missing 3 starting offensive linemen there, and the Texans are just playing better easily right now at this point of the season. They could very easily just stack the box and say, since Malik Willis is going to run, since Derrick Henry's going to run, we dare you to beat us through the air. We'll go man covers the entire time, and Malik Willis won't be able to beat them. So I just think the Texans are absolutely live here to just destroy the Titans and not allow a single point. So it makes them a great play.
I think this is a really interesting week for defenses because Home defenses, home favorite defenses also happen to be the few games that we're targeting for scoring. One of those is the Chiefs and the Seahawks. The Chiefs are the biggest favorite of the week, 10-point favorites at home in sub-freezing conditions. And a 10-point favorite, they're already a good salary value, 4,200 FanDuel, 2,900 DK. Being favored by that much at a middling salary is already very attractive. In a lot of weeks, that will make them chalky. They're not going to be chalky. They're going to see very moderate ownership. They're top 5 in adjusted sack rate. The Chiefs are. Seattle's bottom 10 in adjusted sack rate allowed. So this is a spot where, I mean, value, ownership value, 10-point favorites, give it to me.
I like it.
All right, that wraps up week 16. As a reminder, the Discord show is tomorrow, Saturday, Christmas Eve, 10:45 a.m. If you are in Discord on Christmas morning, you might get a couple messages from us, but chances are we're going to be celebrating, maybe nursing a Christmas Eve hangover, who knows? But can't promise you anything on Christmas morning, but we will be there tomorrow to break down that main slate. If you are looking for more of the breakdown on the Sunday slate than we talked about here, that breakdown that is on the site on 4for4 does have full ownership and projections and leverage scores. If you haven't signed up yet, only $24 will get you access to that show in the morning on Discord, as well as access to all of the content tools projections through Super Bowl week. If you don't want to pay for the $24 and you haven't signed up for Underdog yet, you can just get a DFS subscription for free. All you have to do is go to 4for4.com/underdog and sign up for a new account for that free DFS sub. Use the promo code 4for4, and they'll also give you a 100% deposit match up to $100. If you want to give us a nice little holiday gift, please give us a 5-star rating and review on whatever platform you're listening on. It helps out a ton. If you're watching on YouTube, please like the video. Please subscribe to the 4for4 channel. It goes way further than you know, and it doesn't cost you $1. And if you want to follow us more, Daigle is at NotJDaigle on Twitter. 4for4 is at 4for4 football. I'm at TJ Hernandez. Merry Christmas, happy holidays, whatever you celebrate. We hope you guys have a good one. Safe travels out there. Appreciate you guys. Talk to you next week.